session in which they denounced the organisation and denied its accusations. HRW's director was described as a dog of the Interahamwe, the Hutu militia, which carried out much of the 1994 Rwandan genocide. Journalists in Malta have protested outside the courts of justice in Valletta after an investigative reporter delving into alleged high-level corruption was killed by a car bomb on Monday. They filed an application urging detectives to ensure that Daphne Caruana Galizia's sources remain protected. The journalist said the attack would not stop them fulfilling their role as a watchdog. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. Charles Haviland has more details.
Surrounded by Siberian mountains, Lake Baikal holds 1/5 of the world's fresh water and thousands of unique species. But Russian biologists and officials are alarmed at the rise in threats to its ecology. Because of polluted wastewater, there's been a steep fall in the numbers of the omelfish, which is only found in the lake and is an important part of the local diet. There is now a ban on commercial fishing of the omel. Other species, including invertebrates, are being killed by rotting algae. President Putin says the protection of Lake Baikal is a priority.
Charles Haviland reporting. BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Jonathan Blake. It's now 3 weeks since people in Iraqi Kurdistan voted in a referendum on independence. But since then, government forces from Baghdad have moved in to take control and tensions are high. Now, the United Nations has issued a statement detailing reports of houses and businesses being destroyed and people being forced from their homes. Our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston told us more about the UN's concerns.
Its short statement focuses specifically on a place called Tuz Hurmatu, a city where they say they reckon back on Monday and Tuesday around 150 houses were set on fire, about a dozen more were blown up, and some of those houses belong to officials in Kurdish political parties. The UN acknowledges that the Iraqi government sent in the army in an effort to calm the situation there, but of course it's calling on the authorities in Baghdad to ensure that civilians are protected and that anybody who forces people from their homes should be brought to justice.
What is happening more broadly?
Well, the big picture here is that we've seen a very swift and dramatic transformation of the security in this region. Go back a couple of weeks and you'll remember that independence referendum in the Kurdish heartlands when the Kurds voted very much in favour of breaking away from the rest of Iraq, and they hoped that there would be a swathe of territory on the fringes of their heartlands that they would be able to take with them, areas where they were actually militarily in control. But in the aftermath of that referendum, the Iraqi government has sent its forces into those disputed areas along the fringes of the Kurdish heartland, and you've seen Kurdish military presence pushed aside, and so suddenly you have a lot of Kurds in those areas finding themselves no longer the ethnic group in charge, if you like.
And what effort has there been, if any, to calm the tension and reach a settlement without violence?
There is talk about talks. The Kurdish authorities now find themselves in a very weakened position. And they have welcomed the possibility of talks. Tuesday evening, the Baghdad government said they'd be willing to talk to the Kurds if they nullified the outcome of that referendum. And today we hear the Kurds saying they would like to talk, although making no reference, as far as I could see, to any cancellation of the referendum outcome.
Alan Johnston. Spain is facing its biggest political crisis in 40 years. The government says it will impose direct rule on Catalonia after the region's president refused to abandon a push for independence. A government spokesman, Inigo Mendes de Vigo, warned that Madrid would do what was required to enforce Spanish law.
No one should doubt that the government will use all means available to it to restore legality and constitutional order as soon as possible, to regain peaceful coexistence for citizens and to stop the political and judicial insecurity, for which the only ones responsible are the leaders of the Catalan government. They are causing economic and social harm to all their citizens.
Well, Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution allows Madrid to impose direct rule in a crisis, but But it's never been invoked. The Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, is in Brussels for an EU summit, and we'll hear from there later. But first, let's cross to Barcelona now, and our reporter there, Guy Hedgecoe. Guy, so the big question really, what happens now?
Well, on Saturday, Prime Minister Rajoy is planning to hold an emergency cabinet meeting specifically to address this issue of how to go about triggering this Article 155 in the Constitution. As you say, it's never been used before. There's a lot of mystery surrounding it. And so he has to decide exactly how he's going to implement it, and if he's going to use it to take full control of the powers of the Catalan government or just certain areas. And it's going to take a few days or even a couple of weeks or possibly more to actually implement the use of this article of the Constitution.
And what has been the reaction to the threat of invoking that article from those in favour of Catalonia becoming independent?
Well, I suppose, as you would expect, it's been quite an angry response, and we've heard from Carme Forcadell, who is the Speaker of the Catalan Parliament, one of the sort of leading figures of the Catalan independence movement. She said that the European Union and European member countries have to now get involved in this. They can no longer look away. The Catalan independence movement has frequently appealed to Europe to get involved in this and to mediate, and so far it has declined to do so. Other independence leaders said that this was the plan of the Spanish government all along, that it had been planning to introduce this very controversial article in the Constitution for months and months. It wasn't just something that it wasn't a last resort it came up with today. So those have been some of the responses we've had today.
And thinking back to the referendum itself, we saw violence and there were protests, some peaceful, some not, in the days and weeks since then. How much tension is there still, and what sense is there that may spill over again?
Well, certainly today's developments with the announcement of the triggering of this article, that certainly would seem to add to the tension, as does the warning from the Catalan government that it plans to implement its own declaration of independence, formalise a declaration of independence in the coming days. So on both sides, the tension has increased. I think there's a feeling that so far much of this crisis has been focused in the corridors of power, both in Barcelona and in Madrid. And perhaps this is going to move out into the streets more now. We're going to see a lot of mobilisations, demonstrations out in the street, particularly in Barcelona and other Catalan cities in the coming days and weeks.
All right, Guy, thank you very much. That's Guy Hedgecoe reporting for us from Barcelona. To Brussels now, where European leaders are meeting to, among other things, decide whether the EU can start talking to the UK about its future trading relationship. Speaking to reporters as he arrived, the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, said the main sticking point in the Brexit negotiations was the exit bill. He said that so far the British Prime Minister hadn't been clear enough. Our correspondent Kevin Connolly joins us from Brussels now. Kevin, this is a real sticking point for the two sides, the EU and the UK, this bill. What hope is there of a breakthrough during this summit?
Well, I think we can be pretty confident there's not going to be a breakthrough. I think the most the British side can hope for out of this gathering of European leaders is some sort of incremental process. I mean, the October summit here was never exactly a deadline for Brexit. It was just the first date on which EU leaders gather where they could have decided that the UK had made enough progress on those so-called divorce issues, that's the Irish border, citizens' rights and money, that they'd made enough progress on those three issues to allow the talks to move on to trade. Now, they're not going to take that decision. They're going to ask for more movement from the UK on those three issues, and especially, I think, on money. They want more money from the UK to honour various commitments from the past before they'll talk trade. So the focus now is going to move on to December, the next summit. I think it's a problem for the UK not to get that movement in October. It will feel like a crisis if the UK doesn't get it in December.
And as you say, incremental developments is perhaps the best each side can hope for. Let's just have a listen to what the German Chancellor Angela Merkel had to say as she arrived for this summit in Brussels, raising hopes of trade talks being able to start, as you say, Kevin, later this year.
We have made some progress. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, will deliver a report on this. However, as things stand now, it is not sufficient to get started on the second phase of the talks, but it's encouraging us to continue our work so we can reach a point where we can start the second phase by December. I want to continue these talks in good spirits.
So Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, is due to speak at the summit later. What are we expecting her to say, given that she's now sort of in the club but halfway out?
Well, it's an intriguing moment for Theresa May, and I think you got an impression there from Angela Merkel that there is no desire on the European side to make this process look as though it's blocked, to make it look as though it's not possible for the UK to get that movement onto trade talks once it's agreed to further movement. So I think what Theresa May is going to do tonight is not make any big new proposal. We don't think she's come here with any big new idea from the UK. She's going to refer European leaders back to the speech she made in Florence, where the UK made its first big financial offer, and argue that that speech really was a game changer. So she's going to talk about the need for more energy, more creativity, more flexibility, and we'll see later on tonight what sort of response she gets.
OK, thanks very much. Kevin Connolly in Brussels for us. You're listening to the BBC World Service, and still to come here on the newsroom, the entrepreneur trying to bring African art to a global audience.
So if you're looking for something to furnish your house, perhaps looking for some nice art that kind of reflects your culture, finding something that's specifically African is quite difficult.
First, Mariam has the headlines.
The United Nations has expressed concern about the fate of civilians in northern Iraq, following the government's sudden takeover of territory from the Kurdish authorities. The Spanish government has said it will begin the process of imposing direct rule on Catalonia to halt its bid for independence. And there's been little progress in efforts to break the political deadlock over next week's presidential election rerun in Kenya.
Yes, and staying with that story, despite meeting with the chairman of the Independent Electoral Commission, the opposition leader, Raila Odinga, again has insisted that the vote planned for next Thursday should be postponed. The BBC's senior Africa correspondent, Anne Soy, is in Nairobi.
We were expecting that in the afternoon, the IEBC chairman, Wafula Chebukati, was going to meet with the presidential candidates. He had written to them to invite them to a meeting, but that meeting was then cancelled. And then later we heard that he had met with the opposition leader, Raila Odinga, who withdrew his candidature last week. Here's what he said as he left that meeting.
If proper consultations are done and proper reforms are carried out, those fears that we raised are addressed, which made us pull out of this race, then we will consider. But as things stand right now, our position is as we announced it yesterday.
The president is very determined that this election happens. He has been on the campaign trail. As a matter of fact, today he was also on the campaign trail, and he did send out a tweet to say that he's not ready to sit in boardrooms to hold talks and share the government. He would rather leave that to Kenyans to decide who their president will be. People really do not know what's going to happen 7 days from today, and we have never been in this situation where the whole country is in limbo and no answers are forthcoming, neither from the Electoral Commission nor from the political leaders. The stalemate continues here, and people are really worried about what that means for them.
Anne Soy reporting. British scientists say they've made a breakthrough in understanding how cancer could improve treatment for patients. They examined how many changes it takes to turn a healthy cell into a cancerous one and found the answer is only somewhere between 1 and 10, depending on the type of tumour. Here's our health and science reporter, James Gallagher.
If you play spot the difference between a cancer and healthy tissue, you could find tens of thousands of differences or mutations in the DNA. Some are driving the cancer's growth, while others don't play an active role. So which ones are important? The team at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute tested more than 7,500 samples to find the mutations that allow a cell to be more aggressive and cancerous. They showed it can take just one mutation to drive thyroid and testicular cancers. In breast tissue, it's 4, and in the colon it needs 10. One of the researchers, Dr. Peter Campbell, said the research answered a long-standing question in science.
We've known about the genetic basis of cancer for many decades now, but actually how many mutations are responsible has been incredibly hotly debated. What we've been able to do in this study is really provide the first unbiased numbers on that. And it seems like of the thousands of mutations in a cancer genome, only a small handful are responsible for actually dictating the way the cell behaves, what makes it cancerous.
Half the mutations identified were in sets of genetic instructions called genes that had never been implicated in cancer before. The long-term goal is to advance precision cancer treatment. If doctors know which mutations are driving a patient's cancer, they could then use drugs that specifically target that mutation.
James Gallagher reporting. And as you heard earlier on in the newsroom, we were hearing that EU leaders meeting in Brussels were expected to discuss the constitutional crisis in Spain, among other things. And just to bring you a couple of things that the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, has been saying in the last few minutes. He says that there is no hiding that the situation in Spain is concerning, but he does not expect wide discussion on Catalonia among EU leaders during that summit, and there is no space also, he says, for EU intervention. You're with the newsroom from the BBC World Service, and the leader of the Jamaat-ul-Ahrar militant group has reportedly been killed by a US drone strike in Pakistan. A spokesman said Omar Khalid Khorasani died near the Afghan-Pakistan border. Our South Asia editor Anbarasan Ethirajan told us more about how prominent a figure he was.
Omar Khalid Khorasani, he's from Pakistan's tribal region, and he was one of those who really started the Pakistani Taliban in 2007. So he was quite a senior figure among the Pakistani Taliban group. In 2014, he moved away from the Pakistani Taliban and he started his own group, Jamaat-ul-Ahrar, because of internal issues and power struggle. But later on, he accepted the leadership, the umbrella leadership of Pakistani Taliban. Why is very prominent? Because this group has claimed responsibility for a number of attacks in Pakistan over the years. For example, last year's attack during the Easter Sunday time, in which many Christians were killed in a park in the city of Lahore. So that was one of the deadliest attacks in which more than 70 people were killed. And the group also said it carried out an attack on a hospital in the Balochistan province last year. So it comes as a great relief for the Pakistani authorities. They still don't know under what circumstances he was killed, but the group says that he was injured a couple of days ago, and now they've confirmed his death.
Omar Khalid Khorasani killed by a drone strike, it seems, and there's been an increasing number of those recently in this area. What's behind that?
You have more drone strikes. Could be the Pakistanis are now sharing intelligence where these groups might be located, and that they're passing it on to the Americans, and that's why they were able to target these people. So there are a couple of things happening. The President Trump warned Pakistan that they should share information, they should take action against these militant groups. So it is also a reflection of the aggressive American strategy. That is what, they have promised to double up their air support to the Afghan forces, and also they have been telling Pakistanis, if, according to New York Times report, if you're not going to do it, we will do it.
Anbarasan Ethirajan. Hollywood is at a watershed moment, and there is no way back for Harvey Weinstein, according to Tom Hanks. The actor is the latest to speak out a bit against the disgraced film producer. He gave his reaction to our arts editor, Will Gompertz.
I think we're at a watershed moment. This is a sea change.
Do you feel in any way complicit simply because you're part of this Hollywood machine which has allowed this sort of activity to go on?
If Hollywood and the entertainment industry was the only place where sexual harassment occurred, I would say yes. But you and I know that that's not the case. It's built into the rules of society. What can happen out of all of this is there is going to be, righteously, I think, a pause in the discussion for the women to be heard, meaning that perhaps all men, myself included, should pipe down and not try to explain it and not try to comment on it, certainly not to try to defend it or even try to prosecute it, because what has to happen right now is we need to listen to everyone who's ever been a victim and give them the full-throated opportunity to speak as specifically as they are comfortable to doing. Every one of those women, 100% of them, need to be listened to.
I was talking to a very famous, very well-respected actress who's a very good friend of yours, who said almost entirely the opposite. She said it's time for the men to stand up and do something.
Well, I'm saying that first...
Tramadol for the first time. The organisers of the Iditarod trail race in Alaska said several of the high-performance dogs had the painkiller in their systems 6 hours after finishing the course in March this year.
Now, if you're looking for affordable, contemporary and authentic African art, it might be harder than you think. A woman from Ivory Coast, though, is looking to change that. Alice Gbelia's work, Ayoka, showcases artists from across the continent. Mayeni Jones from the BBC's Focus on Africa told us more about the challenges of buying African art.
African fine arts is doing all right. There's been a number of global exhibitions looking at contemporary African fine art. A new museum, Contemporary African Art Museum, opened in Cape Town last month, the Zeit Museum, first of its kind. And there's also been major exhibitions in Paris and in London. Where things get a little bit trickier is on the cheaper side of the market. So if you're looking for something to furnish your house, perhaps looking for some nice art that kind of reflects your culture to decorate your phone, finding something that's specifically African is quite difficult. A lot of these illustrators and designers have individual Instagram pages all over the internet. So if you're not in the know, you might find it harder to find them. And that's where Ayoka came in. The founder, Alice, really wanted to have a central place where a lot of these social media illustrators and artists that do quite affordable work could be found if you're looking for something specifically African. And she didn't want anything that was too cliched, that involved, animals and sunsets. Something a little bit more contemporary.
So is she tapping into here then a growing enthusiasm for authentic, as you say, contemporary African art, which is affordable?
Due to the growth of social media and the growth of kind of social consciousness and activism, particularly among young Africans in the diaspora, there's been a flurry of interest in this stuff. So Ayoka is in that same vein. I spoke to one of the artists that's featured on the website, and she said that yes, diversity is still a problem in the art world, but she's really excited to see the developments coming.
There is a lack, just in general, from whatever sector you're in. You go into the workplace, there's not people that are represented wholeheartedly, and the world is so diverse. So this platform is just amazing, and what so many black artists and ethnicities are doing right now and breaking out of the system that has been put in place. And I do believe that it's like a revolution right now, that there is like a real buzz and just coming together that is just amazing.
Josephine Kabuka ending that report. Danielle Darrier's career in film was, by anyone's standards, remarkable. Spanning 8 decades, she was working until 2010. And after her death, aged 100, Hugh Schofield has been looking back at her life.
Long before Brigitte Bardot earned herself the nickname BB, there was DD, Danielle Darrieux. It was way back in 1931, in the early years of sound films, that the French were first charmed by her performance as the teenage daughter of arriviste parents in the comedy Le Bal. 3 years later, she starred in the directorial debut of Billy Wilder, which she made in Paris, Mauvaise Graine. She was lured briefly to Hollywood and starred in The Rage of Paris with Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and later she played opposite James Mason in the 1952 spy thriller Five Fingers.
And it would be right for us now, because now at last, we are equals.
But the vast majority of Danielle Darrier's more than 100 films were French. Most famously, perhaps, she starred in 1952 as the beautiful aristocrat whose diamond earrings are the centre of the plot in Madame de of Max Ophuls.
Quand j'y serai, je me demanderai probablement pourquoi je suis venue. Pourquoi alors?
And much later, she was the grandmother in a 2002 murder mystery, 8 Women. The French adored her natural joie de vivre and her beauty. She was married 3 times, the second time in 1942 to the legendary Dominican playboy and diplomat Porfirio Rubirosa.
Hugh Schofield looking back on the life of Danielle Darrieux, who has died after a remarkable career, aged 100. You've been listening to The Newsroom from the BBC World Service.
Sport Today is next here on the BBC World Service, and in 30 minutes it's The Inquiry.
Pope Francis is hugely popular around the world, but some critics have accused him of threatening the Roman Catholic Church's core teachings. I'm Ruth Alexander, and this week we're asking, is the Pope Catholic?
Then it's Science in Action. Here's Roland Pease.
It's a story that's been rumbling through the rumour mill for a few weeks now, but on Monday blipped into the limelight. The super-powerful cosmic explosion that brightened the sky, shook the Earth and produced astronomical gold.
That's followed by NewsHour, and at 21 hours GMT, it's Assignment.
I'm Nicola Kelly, and I'm on the East African island of Zanzibar, where drug abuse is fueling a mental health crisis. But with thousands of people turning to profiteering spiritual healers, that's left conventional medicine struggling to cope.
That's all still to come, here on the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Lee James, and this is Sport Today on the BBC World Service, bringing you the sports stories the world is talking about. The head of Brazil's Olympic Committee has been charged with corruption during the campaign to win last year's Games for Rio. We'll have more on that. And the Manchester United boss, Jose Mourinho, needs to look at himself and stop talking about his former club. That's according to Antonio Conte. We'll find out what's annoyed the Chelsea manager. That's all coming up on Sport Today. Join me in 2 minutes.
BBC News with Marianne Marshall. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia of its autonomous powers on Saturday, after the regional authorities refused to back down in their push for independence. EU leaders have expressed their support for the Spanish government. The United Nations says it's worried by reports of the forced displacement of civilians, mainly Kurds, in northern Iraq. There have also been reports of violence against Kurds. The troops advanced into areas formerly controlled by the Kurdish authorities following an independence vote there. Attempts to resolve a growing electoral crisis in Kenya do not appear to have made any progress ahead of next week's rerun of the presidential poll. Reports say the opposition leader Raila Odinga has asked for the vote to be postponed, but President Uhuru Kenyatta has continued campaigning. President Putin has blamed Europe for the crisis in Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists are fighting government forces. He also accused Ukraine of sabotaging peace efforts. The Ukrainian parliament has agreed to go ahead with 2 bills stripping members of their immunity from prosecution. But campaigners want the reform introduced sooner than the proposed date of 2020. President Trump says he believes Republicans in the US Senate will today approve a budget measure that will make it easier to bring in sweeping tax cuts later this year. Mr. Trump says his proposed overhaul will make taxes fairer, but the Democrats say it's a giveaway to the rich. Rwandan politicians have reacted unusually strongly to a recent report by Human Rights Watch. The organisation had accused the Rwandan military of unlawful detentions and torture. A Spanish tourist in Florence in Italy has been killed by a falling stone fragment in one of the city's main churches, the Santa Croce Basilica. Officials said it appeared that a marble capital from the top of one of the columns became dislodged. BBC News.
You're listening to Sport Today from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Lee James. Coming up, just over a year after hosting the Olympic and Paralympics, the man responsible for bringing the Games to Rio is charged with corruption. One Premier League manager has lost his job this week, so who could be next?
Maybe I'm in the crisis. No, but okay, everybody knows in football the manager's job is a really difficult job. Things change really fast.
And we'll be building up to the start of the biggest bilateral series in women's cricket between Australia and England. But we start with the news you may have heard. The South African singer and former Member of Parliament, Jennifer Ferguson, has accused Danny Jordaan, the head of the South African Football Association, of raping her in 1993 in a hotel in Port Elizabeth. Mr. Jordaan, who organised the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, has not yet responded to a request for comment. Nomska Maseo is the South African correspondent in Johannesburg, who told us about the allegation which has been made.
Well, the allegation has been made by a former Member of Parliament and a South African musician, Jennifer Ferguson, who now lives in Sweden, who says that she was once invited to perform at a sports administration's function in 1993 in the town of, in the Eastern Cape, the town of Port Elizabeth. And after her performance, she then went to her hotel suite where where apparently Danny Jordaan, who is the president of the South African Football Association, accompanied her, and then she alleges that she asked him to wait outside, and while she was in the bedroom getting changed, she alleges that Danny Jordaan then walked in and raped her, and she says the ordeal lasted for about 20 seconds, but says that it felt like it was a lifetime, and then after that, she then says that Danny Jordaan did not say anything but except for walking out of the room, and then only seeing her the next day, and nothing was ever spoken about when it came to these rape allegations until this week, when Ms. Ferguson actually wrote on her personal blog and also posted these allegations on Facebook. And of course, we have not heard from Danny Jordaan himself. We have tried to get a comment from him or his spokesperson, but no one has been available to comment.
Nomsa, tell us more about Ms. Ferguson then. Why has she decided to say this now?
Well, she says that she was inspired by the fact that so many other women across the world have been coming forward via the hashtag #MeToo on social media, and she says that she wants to do this because she wants to encourage other women to speak out, no matter how long ago or how recent the rape allegation has taken place. But she also says that the reason why she decided to come forward now is not because she wants Mr. Jordan to be punished, but it is merely to encourage other women and also to speak out because she has been silent for so long, and she sees that her silence has been her way of punishing herself instead of speaking out.
What do you anticipate could happen now? Under South African law, could an alleged offence from 1993 ever be brought to court?
Well, according to South Africa's Criminal Procedure Act, it provides for a 20-year prescription period. And as you know, that this rape allegation is now 24 years old. But South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority, who I was just on the phone with a few minutes ago, they are saying that rape in most circumstances is an exception to the rule. So if Ms. Ferguson decides to go ahead and press charges, Mr. Jordan could be prosecuted for this claim.
Nomsa Maseko, the South African correspondent in Johannesburg. Now to the English Premier League. One club looking for a new manager, one manager who's coming under serious pressure, and two managers who are having a war of words. Let's try and make sense of all of this with our football reporter, John Bennett. And John, let's start with Leicester City. Are they any closer to appointing a new boss?
I think it's still very early days in their search, Lee. I mean, some huge names have been mentioned. The Leicester City owners are very ambitious. Carlo Ancelotti, Thomas Tuchel. I doubt very much they will get them. Sam Allardyce, former England manager, has ruled himself out. So the likes of Sean Dyche, Chris Coleman, Alan Pardew being mentioned. Craig Shakespeare, remember, was sacked just 4 months after signing a 3-year contract. Leicester have only won one game this season. They're in the relegation zone, third from bottom. And his assistant manager, Michael Appleton, is going to take charge for the game on Saturday at Swansea. So what was Michael Appleton's reaction to the news that Craig Shakespeare had been sacked on Tuesday?
A little bit surprised. But the old adage, obviously, nothing surprises you in football. And obviously that is a phrase that gets used quite often. And you find yourself very quickly being put into a situation where you've got a group of staff and obviously a group of players that, you know, you have to get them prepared very, very quickly and try and get them concentrated on what's obviously a big game on Saturday.
Do you want this job?
It's a situation for me where, and I've made this, you know, pretty clear to the powers that be, that I signed a contract in the summer to be the assistant manager of Leicester City. And I fully would love to honour that contract, given the opportunity.
That's not a no.
It's not a yes.
Very well done. That's the managerial situation at Leicester then. What about Everton, John? How important is the match about to kick off in the Europa League for their manager Ronald Koeman's future?
Yes, they're playing Lyon. Really tough game. I think Lyon aren't probably the force they were last season, but they've got some very talented players in France's Ligue 1, one of the biggest teams in France's Ligue 1. Everton have picked up just 1 point in the Europa League so far. And in the Premier League, it's not been much better. 1 win in 7. They're 16th in the table. And that's despite having a huge amount of money now. Their owner, Farhad Moshiri, has invested a lot in the club. He was at the training ground on Friday. It's led to a lot of speculation. So will Ronald Koeman be the next manager to lose his job? Last week, he said that every manager is possibly 4 games away from a crisis. Is he then close to a crisis?
Maybe I'm in the crisis. No, but okay, everybody knows in football the manager's job is a really difficult job because things change really fast. And we know that most of the time the manager don't get really the time to improve the team. And I feel sorry for Greg because I think he did a really good job. He took it over from Ranieri and they solved them in the Premier League last season. And but it's football, it's hard to take for the managers, but okay, it's part of the job.
That's Ronald Koeman's Everton then, playing Lyon. It's now 32 years since the club won their only major European trophy. I've been speaking to the former England midfielder Peter Reid, who was part of that team, which also won 2 league titles and the FA Cup.
The one that gave me the most pleasure was the FA Cup in '84, because that's where we'd been struggling that season. and we got beat in the Milk Cup final against Liverpool. Brilliant day down Wembley. The replay at Main Road got beat. The referee didn't give us a penalty in the first final. Not that I remember, and I'm not sad. I'm not sad and bitter about it, but yeah, it was a useless decision. Anyhow, we move on. I digress. But when we won that trophy, I remember coming down. It was a beautiful sunny day at Wembley Stadium, the old Wembley, which I adored. I mean, wasn't like this one, the palatial, great for corporate, but it just had that magic, you know, the Twin Towers and the 39 steps. And I remember coming down the steps and seeing Howard Kendall's face in this. He had a grey suit on, and the beam. It'll live with me for the rest of my life. And now, winning that trophy, the first major one, was the highlight for me.
Well, the trophies came thick and fast for you. Everton are trying to get back to that level now, but there has been a lot of negativity around Ronald Koeman's team this season. Can you understand why he's coming under so much pressure, and how do you feel about the way Everton are playing at the moment?
The way I look at Everton, I think Everton now are a side that's playing with the pressure, with a lack of confidence, and you can't do anything under pressure well. I think and confidence is a big thing. The only way, it's not magic sawdust. The only way you get that is to work hard. And like I say, Ronald Koeman's an experienced coach. You'd like to think the players that have arrived at the football club were his players. I think he had to get a front man. He didn't get a front man when Lukaku went.
Did that surprise you, the amount of money that was spent? They didn't get a striker.
It surprised me because I think everybody knew, well, we all knew that he was going months and months, but possibly 12 months before he went. You know, when Everton got decent money. I think a striker, I think possibly two should have been lined up, but it wasn't to be. And even now, you know, he's brought in some players, and it takes time. I appreciate that, and I think Everton will give him time, but you've got to see improvements on the park.
Well, is he going to get that time? Because we've got Lyon tonight in the Europa League, then Arsenal, Chelsea in the League Cup, Leicester City. Difficult run of fixtures coming up. Is he going to retain the club's support, do you think, Ronald?
Well, what I'd say, and that's a good question, what I'd say to that is get out there tonight, get the crowds, get a high-tempo game, get the crowd behind you, let's win the game. The rest will look after themselves. If you win this game tonight, you win it well, you bit of style, bit of energy, you win this game tonight, who knows what against Arsenal on Sunday. Tonight's the priority, don't even worry about time. Win this game tonight, and if I was going to give any advice, that's what it'd be.
That's Peter Reid. His autobiography, Cheer Up, Peter Reid, is out now. Everton to come then, John. Arsenal have been in action, coming to the end of their match. How are they getting on?
83 minutes gone. They're playing playing Red Star Belgrade, and it's 0-0. Even the biggest Arsenal fans may not recognise some of the names in the team. Maitland-Niles, Willock, Nelson. There's a few experienced players like Giroud in the team as well, but it's an inexperienced team. Elsewhere, the other big game going on as we speak. Also, 5 minutes to go. It's Nice 1, Lazio 2.
Now, we love a managerial fallout on Sport Today. The war of words, then, between the Manchester United and Chelsea bosses.
Yes, always been a bit of tension between the two. Jose Mourinho, who used to be at Chelsea, now at Manchester United, and Antonio Conte, who's now at Chelsea. Remember, Mourinho didn't like the way that Conte celebrated when Chelsea beat Manchester United last season, and before this season, Conte said that Chelsea must avoid a Mourinho season.